Hey there, survivors. For those of you following the After Zombie Outbreak series, this tape is different. It's not another survivor testimony or a glimpse into the aftermath. This is Riley before the collapse, before the infection had a name, before the streets emptied out. It shows how someone like him, just a city reporter doing his job, found himself inching closer to the truth long before anyone understood what was coming. It fills in the silence before the first sirens. It shows what institutional denial really looks like, how the city's systems were already moving pieces into place, not to stop what was coming, but to contain it. This tape matters because it's not about the fall, it's about the steps we missed on the way down. Sometimes the end of the world doesn't start with a bang, it starts with paperwork, closed doors, and quiet disappearances. And sometimes someone's already recording. This is Riley Hart, Daily Lantern, recording from my apartment. Now I'm working on discretionary spending in the city's emergency services budget. Dry stuff, not the kind of story that gets shared online or wins awards, but the kind that matters, especially when funds are being reallocated without explanation. My editor, Brenda, passed the tip to me. Some of the newer city ordinances had strange footnotes. Emergency appropriations being funneled into private logistics companies. Disaster preparedness was the official justification, but there was no oversight, no paper trail for what the money was actually being used for. And I started digging. That's what led me to Councilman Elijah Shore. Third-term city official, bland as toast, but well-connected. No scandals, no public drama. His voting record was squeaky clean on paper, but his name came up on multiple authorization forms tied to a new ordinance, 86-19, passed quickly, little media coverage. The language in it was vague, too vague, establishing provisional readiness for future public safety scenarios. That could mean anything from stockpiling first aid kits to building secret bunkers. And it came with a tidy $4.2 million in redirected funding. I wanted to ask Shore about it directly, but I knew better than to start with a confrontation. The man wasn't going to meet me in his office and spill the details over coffee. So instead, I started small: background checks, property searches, donor history. That led me to a house he owned on the edge of the city, not his registered address. This one was tucked away in a half-developed residential loop near the industrial park, a cul-de-sac with maybe 5 finished homes and a dozen empty lots, the kind of place developers gave up on when the money dried up. Yet this house was maintained. Perfect lawn, trimmed hedges, security camera above the garage. I drove out there on a Tuesday morning, acting like I was doing a real estate follow-up. Clipboard in hand, neutral clothes, phone camera turned off. I parked a block away and walked up the street. No one else was around, no joggers, no delivery vans, just a few parked cars. Shore's house sat at the end, shutters closed, no visible movement inside. I knocked, waited. Nothing. I knocked again. Then the door opened. Not all the way, just enough for a woman to appear. Early 30s maybe. Slacks and a dark blouse, no name tag, no smile. She didn't ask who I was. She looked at my clipboard, then straight at my face and said, "You're not with development." Her tone was flat. Not hostile, but not confused either. Like she already knew I wasn't who I claimed to be. I fumbled a bit, gave her a half-cooked line about ordnance audits and asked if the councilman was home. "He doesn't reside here," she said. I asked if I could speak with whoever managed the property. "This property isn't available for inspection," she replied. "You need to leave." I tried a different approach. Asked if she knew anything about Logan and Rourke, the logistics company listed on the funding documents tied to 86-19. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something in her posture tighten. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, stepping outside, pulling the door mostly shut behind her. "If you're recording, I suggest you stop. This is private property." I didn't argue. She was right, it was private, and I had no press credentials out, no appointment. Still, I noted how she didn't deny knowing the company, didn't even blink at the name. Then, as I turned to leave, I heard something behind the door. Mechanical. A hum, then a soft clank, like a compressor kicking in. Not unusual for a large home. Could have been an HVAC unit, a water system. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded industrial, out of place. I didn't press it. I thanked her for her time and walked away. Didn't rush. Didn't look back until I'd rounded the corner. Then I took a photo of the side of the house from behind a hedge. No plate on the van parked in the driveway. The windows were tinted and the body had no logos. I took a few notes and left. That was the first visit. I didn't go back for a few days. I spent that time researching Logan and Rourke. Almost nothing public. No website, no press releases. Listed as an environmental logistics firm in some procurement documents. Their business address linked to a shared office park in another state. A shell, basically. I brought what I had to Brenda, my editor. She gave me the look. The one where she leans back in her chair, crosses her arms and says, "What's the headline here, Riley?" City council funds private company to do unspecified things with unspecified money. That's not a story, that's a hunch. She wasn't wrong. I didn't have anything printable yet, just a lot of weird. She told me to keep digging, but to be smart about it. "Don't go knocking on doors without knowing who's behind them," she said. I nodded. I left. And then I went back to the house the next evening. This time I didn't approach the door. I parked farther out and waited. Dusk turned to night. No lights came on in the house. No movement. Around 9:30, a van pulled up. Different from the first one. Larger, same lack of markings. 2 people got out. Masks on. Not full hazmat, just N95S and gloves. They opened the garage door from the side panel and I saw, just for a second, the inside light flicker on. It was bright. Too bright for a residential garage. There were 2 metal tables inside. One of them had something on it. Covered. The shape was ambiguous. Could have been a piece of equipment. Could have been something else. They didn't stay long. Less than 10 minutes. Then they closed the door and left. That was enough for me to pull back. I wasn't equipped to confront anyone. I didn't even have a way to prove what I'd seen, but something was happening there. Not illegal, not yet, but secret. And funded by public money. Since then, I've been going over public procurement records for the city's health department. Some of the same language appears. Forward Containment Initiative, Enhanced Quarantine Zones, Non-Public Readiness Protocol. None of it makes sense, not unless there was a plan being built for something nobody had told us about. Still, I'm not jumping to conclusions. This isn't some conspiracy theory, not yet. This is still bureaucracy, funding cycles, contracts, vague language and plausible deniability. But when too many vague things line up, that stops being coincidence. It becomes a pattern, and patterns are what journalists follow. A few days have passed since the last recording. I've been going over more city budget documents, and I've started mapping out every contract that's even remotely tied to Ordinance 86-19. The deeper I go, the harder it gets to stay objective. I have to keep reminding myself, this is an investigation, not a conclusion. There's no smoking gun, no official wrongdoing, just a pattern that refuses to settle into something normal. I've learned to pay attention to details. You don't always start with proof. Sometimes you start with a question that gets under your skin and won't leave. That's what this is, a question. Here's what I know so far. Over the last 14 months, the city has approved 7 procurement contracts for environmental logistics services. 6 of those went through typical public bidding, wastewater systems, landfill stabilization, flood response, routine. The 7th, however, was different. It was awarded without a competitive bid, quietly, and the language in the contract wasn't specific. It referenced biological containment planning, forward materials staging, and my favorite, climate anomaly stabilization drills. That last one doesn't even mean anything. It's a placeholder for something else. Something vague enough that no one asks questions, because no one knows where to begin. I tracked the payment records. Every vendor submitted invoices with standard codes except for Logan and Rourke. Their entries are flagged with non-departmental tags, which usually only show up when multiple departments are pooling funds: fire, police, emergency management. But those departments haven't reported any joint operations this year, not publicly. That means someone is moving money quietly across divisions without oversight, and the only name that ties directly to every authorization form is Elijah Shore. Today, I paid a visit to the Office of Public Health to pull archived logs on infectious disease response plans. Normally, I wouldn't go down that road. It's not connected to what I'm researching. But something about the language in the ordinance triggered a memory. 2 years ago, during flu season, there was a quiet city-wide drill involving makeshift triage centers. They set up test tents in hospital parking lots, mostly for optics. But I remembered one email from a nurse I interviewed back then, someone who mentioned that certain protocols didn't match standard CDC guidelines, so I asked around. Most of the staff brushed me off, but one of the archivists, a woman named Renee, offered to help. She remembered me from a piece I wrote about clinic closures last year. I asked her if anything unusual had been filed under containment or emergency simulation exercises. She nodded. Said she'd seen a request come through last month for access to restricted health zone designs, ones normally used for hazmat scenarios, not airborne viruses. She couldn't show me the files, they were marked internal only, but she hinted that the origin code listed wasn't from any health division she recognized. It began with a new department string she hadn't seen before, DNR TAC. I wrote it down. DNR is a common tag for Department of Natural Resources, but TAC, that's new. Could be tactical, or maybe Technical Advisory Council. But I couldn't find it listed on any city department chart, no public office, no direct phone line. It just exists on paper, floating like a ghost. Later that evening, I sat down to process everything and realized I was still missing the human angle. Numbers don't move people. Stories do, and right now, I have too many receipts and not enough faces. So I went back through some of my old interviews from other investigations, anything with overlapping city involvement. That's when I remembered a name, Caleb Ryan. Ryan used to work in city planning, a mid-level analyst who helped draft budget justifications. I spoke to him once, years ago, during an infrastructure audit story. He struck me as straight-laced, pragmatic, the kind of guy who still used graph paper when Excel would do. I found him through a professional database. Turns out he left his city job 5 months ago and now consults for a private contractor. I sent him a message. Didn't hear back. Tried again, more direct this time. I asked him if he remembered working on Ordinance 86-19. He called me back the next morning. I could tell from his tone that he wasn't thrilled. "I don't talk to reporters anymore," he said. I asked him to talk to me off the record. No names. Just help me understand what the hell 86-19 is supposed to be funding. He sighed, said, "Meet me at Gino's on Grand, noon. Don't bring a recorder." I didn't. Gino's is one of those old diners where nothing changes. Same plastic menus, same chipped mugs, same waitress who calls everyone hun. I got there 10 minutes early. Ryan was already in the back booth, nursing a cup of coffee and checking his watch like he'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't shake my hand, didn't smile, just nodded. We talked for 30 minutes. Most of it can't go on record, but here's what I can say. Ryan confirmed that 86-19 started as a routine proposal, emergency modernization, updating city communication equipment, logistics readiness. But in the final draft stage, a secondary clause was added, Section 9B. It rerouted part of the funding to non-governmental field response partnerships. Ryan asked questions. He was told the details were confidential and approved at a higher level, not classified, just compartmentalized. His word. He said he let it go because the language was technically sound, if vague, and because when you're told something is above your clearance level, you don't push unless you want to be removed from the chain entirely. Then he told me something else. 2 weeks before he left the department, he received an inter-office memo instructing all planning staff to purge drafts and backup files related to the early versions of 86-19. Not unusual, except the memo didn't come from City Legal, it came from DNR TAC. That same ghost code again. Ryan didn't argue. He backed up his own files privately, then accepted a job offer from a private firm out of state. When I asked why he left, he just said, "You can't see where the line is until you almost cross it." He wouldn't say anything more. I went home after that and stared at my wall of notes. I've got pins and strings like a conspiracy theorist now, but it's not paranoia. It's structure. It's how I think. And what I keep seeing are pathways that all begin in different places but curve toward one center. Score. Every contract, every redirect, every quiet line item. Somehow, it all loops back to him. I don't know if he's the architect or just the messenger, but he's the axis. I pulled up one more document before I called it a night. A property zoning permit from 4 months ago, filed for a facility out near the edge of the county. Rural, almost forgotten. The applicant was listed as a development holding company. The actual owner of record? Logan and Rourke. They've built something out there. A compound of some kind, listed as storage and environmental resilience testing. I ran a satellite view. The buildings are prefab, steel-roofed, fenced perimeter. Power lines run in, but no signage, no access roads. I'd never have noticed it if I wasn't looking. And now I can't stop thinking about it. This is no longer just an investigation, it's starting to feel like something else. I'm not sure I know how to describe it yet. It's not criminal, not in the way we're trained to identify. It's deeper, procedural, institutional. The kind of wrong that gets built into systems and hidden behind acronyms and harmless-looking budgets. No one's panicking, no one's looting stores or building bunkers. There's no headline that says, "Crisis imminent." But I've learned to listen to what isn't said, and what isn't being said right now is why the city is preparing for a kind of emergency it won't define, why people like Shore are quietly moving pieces around like they know something we don't. The past 48 hours have been spent tracking down the location listed on that permit, the rural property owned through Logan and Rourke's holding company. I needed to see it myself. The satellite images showed only outlines. A few prefab structures, some fencing, utility lines, no signage. It looked like a storage yard. But given everything else I'd uncovered, I wasn't expecting to find forklifts and old desk chairs inside. It's located about an hour and 20 minutes outside the city limits, near a half-abandoned stretch of road that used to lead to a shuttered quarry. No major traffic, no reason for civilians to pass by. That's important. If someone wanted to build something out there, they wouldn't have to worry about visibility. I prepped carefully, wore a standard grey utility jacket, nondescript baseball cap, brought a clipboard in case I had to bluff as a contractor, and I left my phone in the car, brought a disposable camera and a cheap pair of binoculars instead, no recording devices. I didn't want anything traceable pinging off cell towers. Paranoid? Maybe. But when you follow city money trails that vanish into private hands, you develop instincts about where caution is warranted. I parked about 1.5 miles out and hiked in through the tree line. The air was dry still. I crossed an old access trail, picked my way through some overgrown brush, and stayed low. When I finally had a clear line of sight on the perimeter, I stopped and took it all in. The facility is surrounded by a tall chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Not new, but well-maintained. The main gate is manual, 2 swinging arms with magnetic locks. No visible guard post. Just a reinforced concrete pad in front of it and a small camera dome perched on a steel pole about 12 feet high. Inside the fence were 4 buildings, all steel-framed. Identical construction, prefab modules with reinforced siding, no windows, small ventilation caps at the top, and single-door access points on the sides. Power lines connected to a secondary transformer unit. No visible signage, no branding, no vehicles parked in the open. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd think it was some municipal utility depot. But then I noticed the one thing that didn't fit. Each building had what looked like an external cooling system mounted on the shaded side wall, big enough for data servers or industrial refrigeration, but the structure didn't match any comms hub I've seen before. No satellite uplinks, no microwave dishes, and the air units weren't running continuously. They pulsed, on and off, like they were maintaining temperature within a tightly controlled threshold. I spent the next 2 hours observing, took notes, sketched the layout. At one point I saw movement. A man in a light grey jacket, maybe mid-40s, walked from one building to another carrying what looked like a case for medical equipment. Not a cooler, not a tool bag, something stiff, with visible latches and side grips. He used a badge to unlock the door. In and out in less than 3 minutes. No vehicles arrived. No sounds from inside the structures, just those cooling units cycling on and off, and a faint hum that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This place wasn't a warehouse, it was containment. But for what, I still don't know. I didn't approach the fence, didn't try to break in. I'm not reckless, I don't carry a weapon, and I don't believe in heroics. I believe in leverage, evidence, and timing. And right now, I didn't have enough of any of those things to justify the risk, so I pulled back the same way I came and drove home. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing the words from Caleb Ryan, about the memo from DNR attack, about data being purged, about things happening above clearance. And the woman at Shore's other house, the way she knew who I was without asking. These weren't isolated oddities. These were symptoms of something structured, something buried under the surface of official procedure. I opened my laptop and started from scratch. No notes, no cross-referencing, just a clean window and a blank map of the city, and then I started marking locations. Councilman Shore's secondary residence, the Public Health Department storage building that quietly had its access codes changed last month, the location of that mysteriously redirected supply shipment I stumbled on last week, pallets labeled for emergency medical distribution, sent to a warehouse that doesn't exist on city maps, and now, this compound outside the county line. A rough arc started to form. Not a perfect circle, more like a wide, staggered curve wrapping around the outer edge of the metro. None of the locations fall in the center. They ring it, like satellites. If this were just disaster readiness, I'd expect centralization, command centers, clinics, dispatch hubs. But this pattern isn't about response. It's about separation, distance, isolation. These aren't nodes in a network, they're barriers, or fail-safes. The implications sat in my chest like a stone. The next morning, I decided to visit my mother. I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks. She lives alone now, in the same row house we moved into when I was 10. After my dad passed, she retired from the hospital and settled into a slower rhythm, gardening, volunteering at the senior center, calling me twice a week to ask if I've been eating enough vegetables. I didn't plan on bringing up the investigation. I just wanted to see her, get my feet back on the ground. But when I arrived, she greeted me with a newspaper folded under one arm and a frown already forming. "Is this the one you're working on?" she asked, pointing to a city column speculating on budget mismanagement in public safety offices. I nodded. She led me into the kitchen, poured 2 cups of coffee, and said, "You're digging in places that don't like to be disturbed. Be careful." I asked her what she meant. She shook her head. Nothing dramatic, but when I was still working ER, there were things that didn't feel right. Patients brought in from city-owned sites with no details. Private security teams dropping them off. No paperwork. Sometimes we weren't even told what the exposure risk was, just instructed to treat, stabilize, and transfer. I asked if she remembered where the patients came from. She said the pickup locations were never disclosed, only that they arrived via unmarked transport. No lights, no EMS, just quiet delivery and hands-off instructions. "I don't think we were being lied to," she said, "but I think we weren't being told the whole story." That sounds about right for the city. She changed the subject after that, asked about my editor, about my apartment, about whether I'd made plans for Thanksgiving yet. I played along, but I took her words seriously. She's not one for conspiracy or speculation. She believes in charts, dosages, and clean procedures. If she says something felt off, I listen. I left her house with more questions than I arrived with. Back at home, I pulled out a printed copy of the original ordinance, 86-19. I started highlighting every term that sounded vague or overly generalized. Then I made a list of the cross-departmental codes used in the funding allocations. Of the 27 line items, 5 were completely unverifiable. No city department claimed them, no invoice details, just transfer dates and closed record codes. At this point, I know I'm not going to get the rest through official means. No amount of polite emails or FOIA requests will fill in the blanks. I need to find someone inside, someone who knows what's behind those doors and is willing to talk. That's what I'm going to spend the next week doing. Carefully, quietly. The wrong question in the wrong ear could close this whole thing off, or worse, get me shut out completely. And I think Shore knows exactly what it is. It's past midnight. My eyes feel like sandpaper, and my back sore from sitting hunched over spreadsheets for hours. But this has become more than a story now. It's a structure. And each night, I discover another piece that doesn't belong. Like a wall that looked solid from a distance, but now shows cracks underneath the paint. The last 72 hours were spent doing what I swore I wouldn't, circling back to shore directly. I didn't try to ambush him, that's amateur hour. I waited. Tuesday morning, I attended a zoning subcommittee meeting down at City Hall. It was mostly routine business, lot revisions, small neighborhood variances, but I knew Shaw would be present, not because it was important, but because he likes being visible on record. He sat in the center, clean suit, polite face, tablet open in front of him. He barely spoke during the proceedings, just nodded at the appropriate times and made sure his name was attached to every unanimous vote. I didn't approach him there. I waited until the break. He stepped out into the hallway with a junior aide and a cup of black coffee. I followed casually, staying off to the side until the aide peeled off to take a phone call. That gave me 15 seconds. I walked up and introduced myself. Riley Hart, Daily Lantern. He smiled the way officials do when they recognize your name but wish they didn't. "You've been busy," he said. I told him I was working on a piece related to emergency budget allocations, specifically Ordinance 86-19. I asked if he could clarify the reasoning behind the non-disclosed partner funding clause. He didn't miss a beat. That's standard protocol for municipal preparedness initiatives. Contracts involving sensitive response services are sealed for operational integrity. I asked him what those sensitive services actually entailed. He looked past me for a moment, nodded to someone he knew, then said, "The language is intentionally broad to allow for rapid deployment and adaptable strategy. It's nothing new." I pushed once more. "Logan and Rourke has received more redirected funds than any other vendor under that ordinance. Can you confirm their role?" His smile thinned just a touch. "We've worked with several partners. If you have specific concerns, you can submit a request through the Public Safety Liaison." Translated into ordinary language, it means, "You're done here." He didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice, just delivered the polished script of a man who's been dodging accountability for years. But something about his eyes stuck with me. They weren't defensive. They were tired. Like someone who knows the fire is coming, and he's already resigned to being too close when it hits. That afternoon, I filed a follow-up request with the Public Safety Office, knowing full well it'd go nowhere. A formality. Something to show I took the official route before doing what I planned next. I needed someone on the inside, not a paper pusher or a PR mouthpiece, someone who'd seen the movement of the actual materials. So I spent the next 2 days calling old sources, contractors, former city employees, friends of friends who used to do grunt work for logistics and storage yards. Most gave me the same answer, never heard of Logan and Rourke. But one call was different. A man named Mason Carr, former delivery subcontractor, specialized in temperature-controlled cargo for medical clients. He did some contract work for a company that turned out to be a pass-through, intermediary logistics for something bigger. Never met the client face-to-face. Always received sealed crates. Drop-off sites rotated monthly. The final address before he quit, that rural facility I visited last week. When I asked if he remembered any specific instructions, he paused and said, "They told us not to shake the cargo and to never open it, even if the seal looked tampered with." I asked what was inside. He laughed. "I didn't ask. You don't ask when the contract says you waive liability for biological material exposure." I asked if he had copies of the paperwork. He said most of it was digital, but he kept a few physical manifests, paranoid habit from a job where you sometimes get stiffed. He offered to scan and email them if I promised not to use his name. They arrived in my inbox that evening. 4 shipping logs, the cargo listed only as biostabilized clinical containers, destination, Cold Facility 03, Substage 2. The sender, a shell company I hadn't seen before, Hexoil Biosolutions. I searched for it. Nothing, not locally, but I found a former address tied to a dissolved research lab in Kansas. The lab was reportedly absorbed by a larger defense subcontractor 5 years ago, just before a quiet Department of Defense audit shuttered 3 regional biocontainment labs. The pieces aren't just connected, they're layered, shielded, buried under layers of outsourced names and overlapping jurisdictions. That same night, I noticed something strange. When I pulled up the property records again for the compound site, the page took longer to load. Then the secondary listing for the land transfer, previously a standard deed swap from a private seller to a development firm, had vanished. In its place was a new update. Record access temporarily restricted pending administrative review. I've been doing this long enough to know what that means. Someone noticed. Maybe not me specifically. Maybe just the general level of digital dust I've been kicking up. But the timing's too close to ignore. That transfer document had been unchanged for months. Now it's sealed. I unplugged my modem, started using a VPN, moved all my physical notes into a safe deposit box. Not because I think someone's going to come knocking, but because I've finally admitted to myself that this might go beyond city politics, and when stories leave the city, they often leave the protections of public records law with them. I spoke to my editor, Brenda, yesterday, told her most of what I've found, not everything, not the remote compound, not the shipping manifests, but the funding trail, the ordnance, the ties to unlisted logistics firms. I told her I thought something was being built in the background, something not listed under public safety because it wasn't designed for the public. She didn't dismiss it. She didn't roll her eyes. She just stared at me and said, "Do you want to print this?" I said no, not yet. She nodded, and I could tell she was relieved. "Riley," she said, "this city's sick in ways that don't show up on lab reports. You've been doing this job long enough to know the difference between infection and symptom. Just don't mistake one for the other." She wasn't warning me off. She was reminding me that the story is never the only thing that matters. Tonight, I stood at my apartment window and watched the lights across the street flicker. For a second, the whole block dimmed, then surged back. Another brownout. That's been happening more often lately. Everyone's blaming it on the aging grid, high summer demand, failing substations. And maybe they're right. Or maybe something's pulling more power than it's supposed to. I went back to that printed map. I highlighted every confirmed facility tied to Logan and Rourke or their shells. I drew connection lines where known shipments had passed through. I marked the dates of each major fund transfer and the corresponding permit approvals. Then I looked at the center of the pattern, downtown, specifically the emergency coordination hub built after the last major flood, the one that never actually went operational, the one that sits empty, lights always on, but no staff ever seen entering or leaving, the one Councilman Shore once called a beacon of preparedness. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe it's the center of the wheel. Anyway, I'll find out. It's been 5 days since I recorded the last tape, and I've gone from quietly suspicious to fully convinced there is something embedded in this city's emergency infrastructure that does not belong, not officially, not publicly, not morally. I've visited 6 locations since then, some tied directly to Logan and Rourke, others only loosely connected through anonymous development companies or ghost permits filed under budget items no one can explain. At each one, the pattern repeated: isolation, minimal staff, high security without any visible law enforcement presence, and equipment that doesn't match what the city claims to be storing. At 7:42 a.m., I parked on the edge of Pier 36, where the city keeps a few of its old disaster supply vessels docked. Most of them haven't been used in years, supposedly too expensive to maintain. But a few months ago, one of those same vessels was reclassified as active standby. It now receives monthly maintenance, selective refueling, and a crew roster consisting of medical and logistics staff, not naval officers, not Coast Guard, not EMTs, civilians, contracted. I got close enough to see the lower hold doors open and a few covered containers being moved onto the deck. I watched from behind the shell of an abandoned inspection trailer. What I saw didn't look like emergency drills. There were no bystanders, no press, no standard procedures, no fire marshal, just a crew that moved like they'd done this many times before, methodically, without fanfare, without oversight. I left before anyone could see me. I've learned not to linger when something looks too organized. Back home, I spent the afternoon organizing everything. All the physical notes, all the photos, printed spreadsheets, interviews, annotated permit filings, every thread I'd pulled in the last 6 weeks. I spread them across the floor of my apartment like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that never came with a picture on the box. And in the middle of that floor sat a list of names. Not a long list, just 4 people, all connected in some way to the ordinance. Caleb Ryan, the city planner who helped write the early drafts. Mason Carr, the former subcontractor who handled biological freight. Councilman Elijah Shore, who directed the funding with surgical precision. And Renee from the Public Health Archives, who, as of this morning, is no longer employed by the city. Her listed department phone number now goes to a generic voicemail. Her email returns a bounce back, no longer active, no announcement, no resignation, just gone. At this point, I did what any good reporter does when the trail gets warm. I tried to go cold. I shut off my devices, moved my files to a private lockbox at a storage facility in Edgewater, kept only the analog copies and this tape recorder. I'm speaking into it now because, frankly, I don't know how else to preserve this. I've spent years writing for an audience. Right now, I'm writing for time, for whoever finds this, for whoever comes next, because I think we're past the point where this can be stopped. Let me explain. In the last 2 days, 3 seemingly unrelated events happened. First, the city's emergency broadcast system issued a test signal, routine, they said. But it was the 3rd one this month, and the message included a new code not seen before, NIM 47C. I ran it through every public safety registry I could find. It doesn't match any FEMA or CDC designation. Second, a security contractor I spoke with off the record told me he was offered triple his normal rate to stand post at a high-urgency containment site for 48 hours, no questions, no cameras, no phones. He declined. 2 days later, his name vanished from his company's roster. And finally, the city's fire department quietly received a bulk shipment of portable oxygenation systems. Not unusual by itself, but they weren't routed to hospitals. They were routed to the old Civic Auditorium on 11th Street, the one that's been closed for asbestos mitigation for the last decade. Why does an abandoned auditorium need emergency oxygen? Why are city resources being moved into shuttered locations? Why are contractors being told not to record what they're doing? Because someone knows what's coming, and they're setting the stage. I know what this sounds like. I've covered stories where people like me sounded paranoid. I've written the polite dismissals. I've been the guy who labeled a source unverified because they couldn't back up what they felt. But I'm not feeling anything this time. I'm seeing it. I'm writing it down. And it all leads back to one thing. Something is here. Not in the science fiction sense, not aliens or government monsters. I'm talking about something real, something biological, something we were warned about in meetings labeled contingency and buried under 5 pages of legalese and acronyms. They're not calling it an outbreak. But why else do you build unmarked medical compounds, freeze ordnance records, and route essential supplies to non-operational sites? Why else does a councilman redirect $4.2 million to a logistics firm with no public face? Why else does a city issue a test signal with no explanation and follow it with silence? Because if you say it out loud, the system collapses under the weight of knowing, and right now they need the illusion of normal. The buses still run, the papers still print, people still file taxes. That illusion is currency, but it won't last, not forever. I thought for a while about submitting this as a full investigative package, wrapping it up in tidy quotes and neutral headlines. City oversight breakdowns raise concerns. Something safe, something unchallenging. But this isn't that story, because there's nothing tidy about what's happening here. There's no quote that makes this okay, and no one in an official seat is going to validate what I've seen. So I'm recording this instead, putting it on tape, not for now, for later. For the moment someone finds one of these buildings with the doors ripped open and no one left inside. For the person who stands in the middle of a cordoned-off street and asks what the hell happened here. I have a decision to make. There's a final address, a warehouse down by the docks. It's the last active site tied to this whole network. The facility code matches every other one I've traced, but this place is different. The shipments all terminate there. No return manifests, no outgoing records, just a dead end point. Whatever's inside that building, it's either the end of the trail or the thing they've been building toward all along. I want to see it. I think I need to. But I'm not stupid. I know going in alone carries risk, especially now. This isn't politics anymore. It's not just money being misused or officials being lazy. It's logistics for something larger, something beyond containment. I don't know what's inside that place, but I know they've gone to great lengths to keep it out of view. People don't spend millions to hide something unless they're afraid of what it looks like in daylight. So here's what I'm doing. If I come back, there'll be another tape. I'll record everything. I'll name names, places, files. I'll finish what I started. But if this is the last one, if something goes wrong, then this tape goes to my mother. I've labeled it. She'll know it's mine. She won't understand all of it. And I'm not going to tell her what it's about. I won't put that on her. But if you're listening to this because I didn't come home and she found this tape and passed it on, then know this. The city knew. Not everyone, no. Most people were just doing their jobs. But enough people saw what was coming, and instead of sounding the alarm, they buried it. They rerouted the funding. They sealed the contracts. They made plans not to stop it, but to manage it, to decide who gets protected and who gets left outside the fence. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.